Tempest Rising is finally here, a brand new real-time strategy game that is heavily inspired by Command & Conquer. If you've ever sunk hours into Command & Conquer, this is going to look pretty familiar, but in a good way. Let's start with what Tempest Rising is at its core, a love letter to the golden age of RTS games, specifically Command & Conquer. From the unit designs, base building, music, and even the way Tempest, which is basically Tiberium, is mined, this game is really a tribute. In both Command & Conquer and Tempest Rising, you've got the central resource. In Tempest Rising, it's Tempest. The UI, the production setup, the faction style, even the tone of the mission debriefs in the campaign. It's giving off that pseudo-military late 90s vibe. It is missing the real actors that Command & Conquer had and are now beloved, but that general feel is there. You've got mech and bio units with lots of abilities and important hard counters, and yeah, of course, you get to run over bio units with your tank. One of the best things about Command & Conquer. Campaign in Tempest Rising features two playable factions, the GDF, or Global Defense Force, and the Tempest Dynasty. Each has its own story arc with about a dozen missions apiece, and missions offer side objectives and alternative paths so that you can try and optimize your gameplay. There's also an additional faction, but it's not playable yet, the Veti. In fact, it's so early on that you can't even click on their website to get more information. In a behind-the-scenes documentary, they were all confused as to whether or not they could even bring up that this exists. My best bet is that they're going to be some type of alien race. I don't know if it'll be playable in the campaign or multiplayer or both, but apparently it's there. The game definitely tries to capture that CNC campaign vibe, like Tiberian Sun or Red Alert 2, where you're thrown into missions with specific win conditions, given familiar unit archetypes, and are capable of using the environment to help you in your mission. So for instance, one of the first few missions here is you're going to play with a sniper, sounds very familiar, and then there's barrels around all of these important points that you could go ahead and explode, and that helps you along your mission. Definitely feels a lot like Command & Conquer. But as much as I enjoyed that nostalgic feeling of playing Command & Conquer, and glad to see that something has attempted to carry on the torch, I did find the campaign pretty frustrating. Not because of the design itself, or the mission design, or the units that they give you, or I don't personally like when they don't give me base building in RTS games, but no, it's not that. It's because of the controls. I'll talk about that in detail in the pros and cons list, but without good hotkeys, I felt frustrated in the bigger base building missions, and actually just ended up giving up on the campaign. And since I gave up on the campaign, at least temporarily, I did go and try multiplayer, and that is where I actually had a much better time. You start with just your construction yard, and from there you build your economy and produce an army. Pretty basic RTS stuff, but with definitely a lot of Command & Conquer in it. The maps are dotted with neutral bunkers and structures you can capture, adding that nice layer of tactical depth pretty early on into a game. With Tempest damaging your non-harvest units as well, this mechanic adds another twist to map design, with one map in particular making it extremely difficult to rush your opponent through the middle. I played 3 multiplayer matches, one of which was on that map that was difficult to rush on. 2 of them were especially rough. I went up against players who clearly knew what they were doing, and the other match, well, I was the one who kind of knew what I was doing, I guess. But despite the mismatches, I could really see the potential here. I could see how my opponent used the neutral bunkers to safeguard their advanced tech or advanced economy. I could see how maps could feel very different from one another and how they're constructed. And I could see how unit interactions could be fun rather than overwhelming and frustrating, since you tend to focus on a few unit types rather than all the units like the campaign gives you. Multiplayer actually feels like the easier experience, and I know that sounds pretty crazy. Most people look to campaign to introduce them to an RTS, and that's often quite literal. They will have tutorial missions that are very clearly trying to handhold you. And while the intent is still in this game, once you get to base building and unit producing in about mission 2 or 3, I think, it can feel like a lot very early on. I mean, I did play on one of the harder settings, but the reason that it could feel a lot is because of all of these hotkey issues I want to explain. But the multiplayer is slower to ramp up, which means fewer control frustrations early on. Of course, you're figuring things out under more pressure than the easy campaign, for instance, but it's more exciting, in my opinion. And that tension of scouting, expanding, and skirmishing reminds me of why I love these types of games in the first place. And now for the meat and potatoes, we got the pros and cons. First up, we got pros. The inspiration. If you love Command & Conquer, you're going to feel very good about this game. It is clearly inspired by Command & Conquer, but in a very good way. As in, they clearly wanted to respect that type of game and bring it into a more modern market with their own story and little twist to it with some of the mechanics in the game, as well as that third race that we have yet to know very much about. So I do love that. I think they nailed it on that part. So if you are looking for a new Command & Conquer, this is basically it without having the official name. The music is absolutely on point. Frank Klepacki is back alongside other talented composers who have brought a great overall theme while still distinguishing music between factions. Finally, there is a lot of passion here. It is very clear that the developers love RTS and CNC style RTS specifically. They're releasing small behind-the-scenes videos that just further reinforce how much love was poured into the game as well, and I've enjoyed watching those as they've come out. But it's just very clearly an attempt to expand and raise that type of game rather than feeling like a straight ripoff or something that feels undercooked or just like soulless, right? No, this game is completely full of soul. I think that they very much are true to the words that they say in these little behind-the-scene videos where they just love the game, was sad that a game like that didn't exist nowadays, and then wanted to put all of their expertise into making the next one because certain other companies weren't willing to make the next one. So I think a lot of people will respect the vision and the execution of these developers. Now that I've talked about the good things, I'm going to talk about the bad things. And the bad things are unfortunately pretty big for me. The bad news is the controls feel really bad. Apparently, you have to use the F1 keys as the default. You can change specifically the function keys to produce the units, but then it doesn't really seem to be a very good alternative. Basically, you'd have to come up with your own system of trying to memorize all your specific hotkeys for all of the units. I can kind of see why this was a problem for them, since obviously hitting the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 would have just gotten you to your control groups, and that's why other RTSs would use E, W, X, grid, whatever it is, right? But that does mean that you have to come up with your own system for all of these units. I'm guessing there are just so many units, it was very difficult to do, but that's kind of my point. It's just difficult to actually produce the units, the thing that you're doing most of the time, with ease. It's really difficult to get into that so-called flow state when you're doing that. Even more annoying, you can't change the add units to control group key from control to shift. It's a lot of muscle memory for me to change for just one game. I gave up, basically. I ended up just creating new control groups every time rather than change my habits. I would have preferred being able to change the hotkey, and that just wasn't possible. Additionally, you can't produce from multiple buildings at once. So you can hotkey multiple buildings on the same hotkey, but that doesn't actually let you produce from all of them. So you could have all your barracks on 5, and then want to hit the F1 key or whatever to build the basic infantry, but you'd actually have to change to each individual barracks rather than just being able to spam that hotkey. So personally, I have not found a hotkey that changes that makes it easier to go and actually produce from every single production building. So I literally click on one with my mouse, then I might remember to use the function key, or I might click on the basic unit, then that produces, then I go to up to 2, and then to 3, and do it all the way through. A much more frustrating 1A, 2A, 3A, 4A, 5A type of situation, which can end up feeling almost fluid when you learn how to do that for Brood War, for instance. But with this, with it being, mouse click plus function keys plus, well, I guess, yeah, that's pretty much it. But it doesn't feel very good. And I got really frustrated from all of these control issues that I couldn't either force a change with the menu options or really just get used to in the campaign. So all this stuff really drags down the campaign. You start most missions with a relatively full base and army. Some missions are just that kind of more typical, almost RPG, but a lot of them are going to be RTS, and they're going to give you a big base and an army that consists of 6+ different types of units. So you got to figure everything out that's going on there. And then you have your odd sim city that you didn't set up, and the map's not necessarily familiar because they're drastically different between missions. And the clunky controls, just, the add on top of all of that, already trying to figure all these things out, and don't let me get into some type of fluidity. They don't make me feel like I'm actually playing the game. They make me feel like I'm playing against the game. So that really makes me not want to play the campaign. Funnily enough, it makes me want to play multiplayer because all that issues with the hotkeys is just less noticeable. So yeah, I'm figuring things out on the fly while potentially being pressured by an opponent, but it's exciting and it's still less information overload with less of that hotkey frustration overload as well. So I liked multiplayer, but I also didn't really get past 10 minutes. I was either killing the guy or they killed me. I can easily see this becoming a problem in longer matches as well. I just didn't actually end up playing more than 10 minutes. But I'm sure the more units you add, the more types of units you add, and the more that speed can be important, the more I think I'm going to get frustrated. So I don't know how long these games will typically last, but right now, multiplayer is just more fun entering into it as a newbie to this style of game, when I usually think the campaign will be. But for me, the campaign was just so frustrating. So Tempest Rising is a game made with heart, and for fans of the classic, it's going to scratch that specific itch that you might have been missing, not being able to just boot up an old Command & Conquer game, no problem. The campaign does have its issues on the controls, basically. I don't really have a lot of complaints for anything else, story, dialogue, voice acting, anything like that. It's really the control scheme. Desperately needs modern updates. But if you can look past that, or if the devs patch it, or if that's actually an appeal to you, having that old school setup, then there's a really, really good RTS underneath. I'm definitely going to keep an eye on this game, particularly the multiplayer scene. I think if I see some show matches set up, or I see certain content creators who are able to dedicate a certain amount of time to the multiplayer scene, I could see a lot of potential in it. I think it could be fun, and I think it's been more fun than some other RTS multiplayers that I've tried. But the hotkeys might always keep me personally away from playing it, and I don't know how much the variation in the multiplayer will be when you only have those two factions right now, third one potentially on the way. But let me know if you're playing in the comments and what your experience has been. Have you tried the campaign? Have you tried multiplayer? Are there a lot of people playing? What's going on with a game and a genre or a sub-genre that I don't know much about? I am actually very curious to see how this plays. It seems like it's getting good reviews and a lot of people are talking about it, so hopefully it's got some legs, and hopefully we'll see some more updates for Tempest Rising. Hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll be back later with more RTS and general video game stuff. Bye-bye.